All right, so in this video, I'm going to waffle on a little bit about some of the really important basics of regulating lifestyle and our habits. And then I'll be answering some Q&A under the assumption that people genuinely actually show up for this, considering it is presently in the middle of the afternoon on Saturday. But either way, I'm at least going to do this video content, and I'll quickly post this on Facebook real quick. Doing some Q&A. Interesting. News feed. Shared. Cool. So basically, the main thing that I want to talk about is something that I generally find myself repeating quite a lot. So I will often get requests from people who perhaps want health advice or want some sort of consultation. And generally, one of the first things that I'll ask is what time are they going to bed and waking up? What's their diet and food intake like? And then what is their exercise like? So how do you deal with stress and anxiety? I would watch the previous video that I posted before this one, literally 5 ways how to deal with stress and anxiety. I would check that one out. Pretty useful, and is 20 minutes specifically about that exact question. So it's the video that was just posted a few days ago prior to this one. So getting back to my point, with one of these things that all of these situations have in common is generally people's rhythms and consistency in these areas is way off. People are staying up really late. Oh, I go to bed at 2 a.m. and I wake up at 11 a.m. and I don't really exercise. Maybe I casually walk, or I'm like a vegan or some other maybe more extreme type of diet situation. So without even diving into complexities of take this or don't take that or do this specifically, really just generally looking at these things. So in essence, going to bed early, waking up early on a regular basis, eating regular meals at regular times on a regular basis, and then actually moving your body every day, some on a regular basis. Just those simple things alone for quite a lot of people will produce a lot of benefit and a lot of results without even making any other big, profound changes. And I've seen this time and time again from talking to people and from telling people this type of situation, or telling people this type of advice. And the vast majority of the time, people come back very quickly and say, wow, this makes such a big difference. Who knew? Or even one person I was talking to, I was just like, you just need to do some cardio. Like, you just need to actually get out and move more. So then every morning they go for a quick jog, maybe like 10, 15 minutes, if that. And they're like, man, it's made such a huge difference. My emotions are better. I have way less anxiety. I feel happier. My body feels better. I sleep better. I have more energy. I'm able to focus better. And I'm like, yeah, no crazy interventions were required. It was something just absolutely ridiculously basic. And then furthermore, we could break it down even more specifically, which to say, let's say this person would wake up early in the morning, first thing, have coffee, and then just go straight to their computer and be in that sort of reaction mode for some hours. And then maybe have a light breakfast or a smoothie or some fruit, and then coast till lunch. And then by lunchtime, they're all super buzzy and ungrounded and in a complete reaction mode. And it's like, well, of course, which many people would look at that and say, oh, wow, that's very healthy. You know, you're having coffee and you're doing basically some form of fasting, or you're eating healthy food and you're being productive. So of course, that's a great thing. But from another perspective, it's actually really unhealthy, and it's just going to create imbalance over the long term. So if they flip that around and instead, okay, maybe they wake up early, so have water instead of coffee immediately, and then maybe have the coffee or have breakfast, then have some coffee, then get to the computer and do some actual work. So if you wake up, have some food, some movement, then perhaps coffee, then perhaps work, and then after that, the stimulation and the crazy reactivity and fight or flight mode is not there, then it's really easy to see how really small adjustments actually make a big difference. And in my opinion, a lot of the time people focus on irrelevant details and things that are typically not that important. So they spend hours being OCD in researching like the perfect smoothie ingredients or the perfect mineral balance of copper, zinc, magnesium, plutonium, iridium, platinum, and like all types of crazy shit. And like, but this doctor said this biochelated form is better than 7.8 milligrams of this form. But then if I take it in this tablet form with this binder, that's actually more toxic. But then if I get this, and they'll spend weeks and months being completely OCD about generally complete irrelevant nonsense, instead of actually looking at really basic, tangible, simple, obvious, practical, pragmatic, straightforward stuff that it oftentimes trumps all of the other kind of OCD, borderline psychotic type of situation. And I'm quite well versed because I spent some years in that mindset. And then also being in this industry, I see it quite a lot. And also I have sometimes customers and clients email me, and I can tell like they're so far down OCD and so far down focusing on completely irrelevant minutia that has nothing to do with anything tangible or anything that will actually lead from point A to point B. It's this massive diversion, and that's just part of sort of, you know, what you're dealing with. So basically, there's a deeper lesson there, which is like if you can't regulate and have some control and regularity with very simple, basic things, then more complex tasks are not going to be accessible and are not going to be possible. For example, I have friends that have the self-image and the public persona of being super spiritual and deeply on the yogic path and deeply, you know, into meditation, mindfulness and presence and higher consciousness and all this stuff. But their ability to actually regulate these things is next to non-existent. They generally don't eat, or they're massive sugar addicts, or they're functional alcoholics, or they're functional drug addicts, aka plant medicines, whether that's cannabis or ayahuasca or mushrooms or a whole host of things. Their relationships and their boundaries are typically chaotic, and their relationships tend to follow predictable, unhealthy patterns. They generally have some issue around making money and supporting themselves, so they have to live in sort of communal spaces and kind of live paycheck to paycheck in many ways. So the point of that is their basic foundational life structure is fairly non-existent. Their ability to regulate simple biological cycles is next to non-existent. And their ability to even acknowledge that that is even a thing is non-existent. But they somehow believe that they are going to do something higher, whether that's some aspect of self-development, self-evolution, personal growth, or spirituality, when it's just, there's no reality in which that's possible or in which that makes sense. It's like if you're going to start a musical instrument, you don't start with advanced pieces, you start with the most basic accessible things to your skill level. And then once you get proficiency, then you can build on, then you can go to the next thing. And that's just kind of a simple, basic nature of life. So it's something that in some ways makes my job easy, or it's not really even my job, because typically people will email me and ask for advice, and I typically don't charge them. I just ask them these simple questions. Usually these cycles are way off, and it's very easy to be like, if you actually just regulate these things, then you'll probably feel way better. Obviously the tangible physical benefits, but also developing the ability to have some control and some sovereignty and some actual input and stability in your life, and being able to create that for yourself is in essence a useful life skill. Developing discipline is very useful, and I think this is a very dangerous and not helpful characteristic that is prevalent in kind of alternative and new age world, which is that discipline and structure are somehow bad or somehow evil, or somehow, you just need to be sort of free flowing and listen to your intuition and go with the flow in all this type of situation. When in actuality, what that is indicating is the person is probably either just completely confused, completely lost, or just operating in one extreme, so trying to go to another to correct it, which it's just not real. If anyone studies anyone who's been successful at pretty much anything in life at a high level, they're usually quite disciplined, quite focused, and quite dialed in on what they're trying to do, trying to do. So, and that's kind of just obvious if you study that type of thing. So, and then in actuality, I think discipline to a certain degree can actually lead to more of a sense of freedom, meaning the stronger actual foundation and root you have, then you feel stronger to move forward and do other things. So in many ways, it's just looking at these simple, basic things, how we relate to food, sleeping, moving, and also relationships and these types of things. So that's generally something that I have been repeating a lot for years. It's something that once I really started doing in my own life, made a big difference and helped out quite a lot. And just getting feedback from clients time and time and time again. And then once these things are dialed in, then the other benefit is your body is in a more stable position to recalibrate, rebalance, gain benefit from any other things that you might be doing. So yeah, that's just something that I would highly recommend checking out and doing, and things that I've talked about in many other videos and will be continuing to repeat in many ways, shapes, and forms, because it is necessary, it is relevant, it is useful, and it is applicable regardless of where we're at. Let me see. I remember you were talking about how the Earth goes through cycles, but you use it as an analogy to describing a process. I forgot what video this was, but do you believe in man-made climate change? I don't remember that video, but there is just a general idea that is that everything in life is cyclical, and there's a rhythm and a pattern to things. And basically many of the, let's say, Eastern traditions and older civilizations sought to understand these cycles and understand these patterns. And this is where a lot of the stuff came out of, to find the patterns in the chaos, to find the organization within the chaos, and to be able to read it and work with it. And I think they actually succeeded. And this is another huge misunderstanding, which is that people will sort of look at Eastern traditions and think that it's some sort of go with the flow, be like water, randomness, intuitive nonsense, which is 100% not true and not the case. It's something someone made up at a certain point, which has no basis in anything real, authentic, classical, traditional, real, or effective. Basically, they tend to believe that everything happens based on causality and for some type of reason. Not reason in the way we think, oh, this happened because I was supposed to be an artist instead of a lawyer. So this happened to show me my one true path was to teach everyone the true wisdom of Reiki and plant medicines. That's not really what they mean, and that's a profound level of delusion and confusion. That's not my opinion, this is just the classical teachings. Another example of this is like in Chinese medicine, people make pretty huge errors when looking at the emotions and when looking at the five spirits. So typically what people will do is see these two things and get all kind of glassy-eyed and start salivating and get a little bit of an arousal thing going on, because they're like, oh, it's spiritual, oh, it's the whole human, they're relating to mind, body, spirit, mental, physical, emotional, energetic. They're seeing the full spectrum. Western paradigm's so bad because it doesn't see these things and it doesn't acknowledge spirit or emotion or energy. And finally, there's this ancient healing system that acknowledges that we're more than just the physical body, we're emotions and we're spiritual beings. That's all not correct whatsoever. according to the classical teachings. The actual classical teachings is that all of the emotions are pathogens, even joy, happiness, excitation, bliss, pleasure, anger, frustration, sadness, grief, all pathogens. And it's difficult for people to understand because it's a pathogen with the understanding of a larger context, meaning any of these things just remove you from any sense of centrality or neutral position. They're all based on distortion and illusion, basically. But people will hear that and either put it on a pedestal and be like, oh, our emotions are so important and meaningful, or they'll say, oh, I'm just going to try to repress them and suppress them and pretend like I don't have them, and that's spiritual. Both of those are incorrect and missing the larger point. But it's a larger point which is outside the context of this video, and I'm not really going to get into beyond what I've just said. The other side of it is people will have that same reaction to the 5 spirits. Like, oh, finally they're recognizing we're a spiritual being, and people will go so far as to be like, the 5 spirits live outside of us and they attach into our organs, and we're creating a good place for the 5 spirits, and this is showing us our spiritual nature. That's also not true and is a really like a kindergarten level understanding of Chinese philosophy and medicine. The real view is that if you have 5 spirits is because you're basically operating in a psychotic, schizophrenic state of consciousness because your mind and yourself is all fractured and divided. So what I love is when people are like, oh, I love these alternative views because they have the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, karmic, da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, well, the fact that you're having all this division and you're implying it is contradicting your own basis of unity and holism and holistic whatever. But anyways, that's a larger point, but I'm just taking those 2 things that people typically latch on and fixate on in a largely incorrect and irrelevant type of way. Because to really understand these types of philosophies is a lifelong study, beyond a lifelong study, and is quite a high-level endeavor. It's not this sort of fluffy, generic nonsense that is publicly and commonly available, because that is just like the kindergarten level. That's like you go to kindergarten and you teach people something, and then they go out into the world and say, this is what it is. It's like, well, no, that's just you learned the most basic, simple, easy concepts because that's where you're starting from. So anyways, do you believe in man-made climate change? I think, again, it's a complicated issue, which I think generally people look at in the wrong way, where they're like, it is true or it isn't true. We created climate change or we didn't create climate change. When in actuality, there's a larger thing, which is how could we not have any type of impact on our environment? Because life is like a relationship. Like even if I just go step and walk through the grass, I just related to and had an impact on the grass. You stretch that out on a large scale, and we're doing things to the planet on a large scale. Of course, there's going to be causes and there's going to be effects. So that much is kind of obvious. The other side of it is nature, by definition, is always changing and is kind of chaotic, and because that's the definition of nature. You say something's natural, you tend to imply that it is somewhat unordered and chaotic and kind of happening on its own. So those are things that are implicit and obvious, I think. So to deny that there is a relationship or an impact and cause and effect is completely stupid, and I don't know how you can be that dumb. But on the flip side, to take it to the extreme liberal sort of fear propaganda position where it's like, oh, we're pieces of shit and everything we do is bad for the planet and we should just die and die off and the planet can just go on, and that's some self-hating, pretty ridiculous type of worldview, which is pretty sad and depressing. And then there's just a lot of doom and gloom in that world. There's a lot of propaganda, and then there's a lot of just emotional manipulation of information. So that's my general opinion of it. But it's one of these So it's another one of these things where life is complicated, issues are complicated, have many variables, but people are stupid. Stupid in the sense of functioning based on emotional bias and agenda and manipulation and distortion. So they can't really complicate or perceive complicated variables, even though allegedly that's what science is supposed to do. But oftentimes that is quite manipulated and diluted based on agendas and funding and whatever. So it becomes one of those things of how can you actually sort through information in an accurate way to find what is relevant and useful versus what is not. And there's also ways in which we could broaden it out and get even more conspiratorial and see that perhaps a lot of the excessive liberalism and stuff that we're seeing now is a much larger agenda to demoralize, destabilize the America and a lot of the Western world, which I think there's a strong case to be made for that. And then it's pretty obvious to see that that's kind of what is happening and how just destable people are and how destable people or how destabilized people are and how unstable their general sense of functioning is. Which is why personally I generally don't take people seriously or really engage or invest in with a lot of what they say or think they say and believe, because generally it's pure illusion or just so abstract and so far off that there's really no sense in engaging with it in a really deep way. You just sort of like, the top is spinning by you, so you just kind of help it keep on spinning rather than trying to redirect it or put it on a different scope. You're just kind of like step back and let it keep spinning its thing. So that's generally how I relate to people, and I'll try to be polite and nice and considerate and help them feel sort of like understood and heard. But also oftentimes it's this thing where I'll be talking to someone and I'm like, I think everything you're saying is completely stupid. There's completely incorrect, is probably harmful to you and is causing you pain and suffering and is so off base that it's crazy. That might be what I actually feel and think about what they're saying, but that's just my personal reaction to a certain degree. So I'll just put that aside and actually just try to listen or be present or supportive or whatever, just listen and be neutral with that person, because generally there's no point in anything else depending on the person or the relationship. But it's an interesting space to exist in. But basically the more in illusion a person exists, the more easily controlled and manipulated and swayed they are. So easily swayed, easily controlled, those things typically go hand in hand, whether that's some liberal, spiritual, conscious type of agenda or the other extreme. It's the same programming, the same mechanisms, and just equally as easily to be controlled and manipulated and swayed. So, yep. Let's see. Can fasting have a place in one's health strategy or can be disruptive to one's system? Yeah, I think if someone is going to fast, then the way to do it in a healthy way is to fast completely. Like, stay at home and lay in bed or lay around and rest and maybe read a book and like literally do nothing while you're fasting. That's probably an actual fast. Or be outside, be out of the city or be out in nature at a specific retreat and fast. And then go into it conscientiously and come out of it conscientiously. Perhaps that could be useful, but in the longer term, it's probably just going to deplete someone's spleen and blood, depending on their constitution. The thing is generally people that are really have a strong constitution and could do fasting are not attracted to it, but the people that have weaker and are thinner and frailer and would not benefit from doing it are the ones that are attracted to it. It's like people that could actually be vegan or vegetarian in a really healthy way are typically not the ones who are attracted to it and want to do it. It's kind of an interesting thing that tends to happen. But something like intermittent fasting, so let's say you're only eating, between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. or something like that, and then you're just eating meals and that's it. So you're giving yourself this whole other window to not eat. I think that is just makes sense and is useful and beneficial in cutting out just unnecessary snacks and unnecessary meals, and basically just looking at food as fuel and looking at it as a means to keeping yourself feeling even keel and stable and balanced more than anything else. So to me, that's the function and the purpose of food and how I look at it and how I consume it. I don't really get cravings. I don't really like, oh, I really need pizza right now. Oh, if I don't have pizza, I'm gonna lose it. I don't really look at food like that, and I don't really have cravings in that way. I don't really have sweets. I don't really care. I can take it or leave it. Like yesterday or 2 days ago, I had an entire bag of these gummy bears, which I think I already threw the bag away, but they're these organic gummy bears, and the whole bag has like only 3 grams of sugar in it. It's like called like super sweets or smart sweets or something like that. They have a line of gummy bears and some Swedish fish and just these types of gummies with no sugar, alcohol, no artificial sweeteners, but only 3 grams of sugar per bag. So I just ate the whole bag, and it was no big deal because I didn't really care. I didn't really like, oh, I didn't have this like emotional, visceral thing. It was just like, yeah, I want something sour and sweet right now. So I just ate it. It's no big deal. And I hadn't had anything sweet prior to that in 4 or 5 months, maybe. So it really doesn't, I think that's a better place to be, honestly, with food, is changing that view. But it's such an emotional issue for people, understandably so, and takes many years to kind of work through, and I think it's useful. So something like intermittent fasting and actually just the other things that I've talked about, eating regular meals and basically getting your balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrate dialed in so that basically your digestion functions evenly and smoothly. You're not tired or heavy after meals, but you're also not wiry and ungrounded, and you just feel even and stable. To me, if a person's accomplishing those ends, that's pretty good. What are ways in which you can learn things faster? I think basically learning is connected to being able to listen and to be able to, mostly just listen. I think if you can listen and actually hear, then you can actually learn much more quickly. But I think people struggle with that because generally their own emotional bias and programming. So they might be hearing something. They're not actually hearing it. They're just already thinking about, do I agree? Do I disagree? But what about this? But what about that? But then this person said, and they're going off on all these tangents, which is not really helpful or useful at all because they're not hearing or actually listening to what's being said. They get caught up in like agree, disagree. And I think I did a video. I've done videos about this on my channel if you search. And there's a certain shift in focus that can be made to focus more on understanding and listening than agree or disagree. Because I can entertain and listen to people that have all types of extreme points of view that, again, I probably think are stupid. I probably think are really just asinine and absurd. But I'm able to listen and be present and have a conversation and not really care one way or the other. Because I try to just listen and hear where they're coming from, but then why they're coming from, and then the experiences that perhaps led to that perception or that belief or that point of view, to actually listen and hear and understand. Obviously, it's not perfect because we're all human beings, so we all do have our distortions and our biases and our preferences, so we can't be perfect, but you can at least try and do your best and try to get better and develop that. The other side of it is developing honesty with ourselves. So being able to listen outside, being actually be able to listen inside and actually have awareness for what is happening and what's actually going on. But again, it's not necessarily easy or comfortable. It's something which takes time and practice and energy and dedication and focus and discipline and regularity. How did you go about learning Eastern and Western spiritual ideals and philosophies? Just through having various teachers, through having a bit of an obsession and a dedication to studying it and plowing through all the information that I could and that I could access. And then, yeah, having teachers and people who actually have legitimate skill and understanding and the ability to communicate such things. And then, in essence, what happened was I had to realize that everything I had learned and thought that I knew was completely incorrect because it was what was available. So it was a lengthy and there's still, I mean, it was a lengthy process, and it still is a lengthy process of being like, you know what, I'm actually wrong about all these things, and I have been wrong about these things, and I've made these mistakes, which is not a comfortable or pleasant thing all the time, but it's somewhat useful if you're actually going to grow or make any changes or learn, because anything you do and learn is about making mistakes. And if you're not willing to make mistakes or fuck up, then you're not going to learn or grow. So that's the other side of it, is I've made a fool of myself a lot. I've looked stupid a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've done a lot of dumb shit. A lot of stuff that I look back on, I'm just like, dude, what were you thinking? Like, but that's part of learning, and I think you have to be willing to go through it and being comfortable with that. Or at least for me, maybe other people might have another way. I don't know. I haven't seen it or heard about it, but that's definitely part of it. Could you share some common misperceptions about the pineal gland that are common and what it really is or isn't? I think it's another one of these things that's completely irrelevant and has no real basis or relevance to any aspect of anyone's actual life. But it's one of these things that people fixate on because they think it's cool or it's trendy and has some shit to do with allegedly DMT and all these things. But no one's third eye is actually open, and I would say their third eye will probably never ever be open, regardless of whatever psychedelic experiences they think they have or whatever nonsense they read online about chakras and this and that. It's not true. It's something someone made up. It has no basis in anything classical or real, in my opinion. Granted, this is all just my opinion, obviously. It's like a live Q&A. People are asking me questions, so sharing my opinion. Feel free to have a different one. But to me, it just is completely irrelevant and unnecessary, and people would probably be better off to just completely forget about it and all things like it and just move on with their lives into something more useful and practical. Because, yeah, there's really nothing about it online that's that useful or correct. There are, of course, practices to do certain things and eventually create certain abilities, but the likelihood of anyone actually learning those things and practicing them correctly and having a teacher and all of the prerequisites for that to even be a possibility is quite rare. So I don't think it's very useful or practical unless someone, just happens to have a hobby about it or find it to be interesting, then of course pursue it. But to me, it's a complete way. Like if I was just sitting around reading about it, I would view it as like a complete waste of time for my day because it's really just a lot of nonsense. I guess I keep repeating that, so that's my answer. What is your opinion on New Age-ism? Done a lot of videos about that, but I guess in general, I think it's just nonsense. A lot of shit someone just made up. And if you actually study the etymology of that philosophy, take it back to the early 1900s with Orientalism and mentalism and the New Thought movement and all these types of people. So it's just misunderstandings and a lot of superstition and hyperbole and just ridiculousness that's passed down through generations and just gets more ridiculous the further it goes on. So to me, it's just complete nonsense and generally functions as escapism and or medication for people or justification for someone's psychotic behaviors. That's what I think it actually is. Not all the time, obviously. Some people just find it interesting. Some people have a natural predilection or desire for more esoteric or weird things. So for them, new agey type stuff is just a stepping stone to something else. Like I was saying before, in some ways you just have to be willing to make mistakes and be wrong. Sometimes that is having shitty teachers, having shitty information, but at the time you think it's good, but then later on you realize it was a bit trash. But again, I think generally it's not that practical or useful. People focused on the things that I talked about at the beginning of this video, their lives would probably improve in a much more realistic, tangible, and beneficial way than focusing on a lot of just fantasy and hyperbole and just complete nonsense. I mean, for me, New Age stuff is just a complete joke. Like, just for example, earlier today I was on a walk with a friend, and we were talking about, seeing different birds, hawks or owls. And then this is what people will do and be like, oh, I saw this animal, so I have to go and look online and see what it means. And it's just always the same type of nonsense. So I was just riffing and making up shit based on what that bird meant, and it was actually quite good and eloquent and coherent. And I think a lot of people would be like, oh my God, that's so spot on. But I'm like, I just totally pulled out of my ass. It's total hyperbole, which go to New Age bullshit generator if you want to get a deeper idea for what I mean. Have you ever read the book of the 5 Rings? If so, what are the things you've learned from it? I've never read it. I haven't heard of it. So I don't know. I cannot comment on it. I was looking for my phone because I could maybe just Google it. And I'll grab my phone and I'll Google it real quick and see if it rings any bells or see if I've seen it. It's funny, I saw someone message me recently and was like, I can't watch your videos because the camera angle is so bad. It's like you're talking down and looking down on your viewers, so I can't watch it. And I'm like, or it's just that I have a shitty Apple case for my iPad and it has a really bad, like if you've seen the original keyboard cases for the iPad Pro, it basically, here's the keyboard and it sits the iPad at like this angle and there's no way to change the angle. It's just fixed at the angle. The new ones, they finally fixed it so you can get a more upright angle. So that's why the angle is the way it is, because I'm using my iPad. So I have to put an ink pen behind the case just to get this type of angle. And then it's like sitting on a box. So it's like, yeah, but this dude was like, I can't look at it because you're talking down to your viewers. And I'm like, or you're just really reading into this a bit much, my friend. But I don't know. I'm probably not as intuitive or psychic as other people. I'm a bit dense and stupid. Let's see, 5 Rings. Let's see about this. 5 Rings Jiu-Jitsu. I don't think that's it. The Book of the 5 Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. Haven't read it, so I don't know. But it's probably cool. It sounds cool. It's written by this Japanese swordsman, philosopher, and strategist. So it's probably interesting. I don't know. It's not really up my alley, but it sounds cool. Sounds like it could be a good read, but I have not read it. Next question. Do you live in or near a city? If so, any thoughts on 5G technology? Yes, I live in the middle of a city in a quite busy area. And fortunately, the city banned or at least heavily delayed 5G until further research. I don't know. I haven't really been paying attention to it, to be honest. Of course, I have a lot of new agey friends on Facebook, so I see all types of propaganda about it. I don't know how legitimate the concerns are because I haven't investigated it or really done any research. What I do know is that from being in this industry, let's say 10 years, I can think of 5 to 8 various examples of doom and gloom type situations that were going to happen, that we all had to come together and raise up to fight this big disaster. But then nothing actually ever happened, or it happened and it really didn't do anything. But people don't have much of a long-term memory, so they forget. So then once the next thing comes along, they're just, oh, now I'm up in arms about that. It's like, yeah, but do you recall the last 10 things that you were upset about that just were pretty much inconsequential or didn't make any difference? Oh no, I don't remember that. It's like, whether it's the conspiracy type world or any type of alternative thing, it's like people should keep track of what they're saying, and then if it actually happens or comes to pass, and then eventually I would say evaluate the validity and usefulness of that whole industry, of that information, based on its success rate or its ability to predict things in an accurate way. In my opinion, many of these alternative fields are severely lacking that type of thing. So in my mind, it's not relevant. Also, generally being fearful and up in arms is not that useful. But obviously there is a time and a place to where if something is a real legitimate threat, then perhaps real things should be done. Or perhaps there could be the option of let's wait and do more research before we roll this out. So I don't know. I don't really know enough about it, but those are my small opinions on it. Let's see. Did you drink tea today? I have not had any tea today. I had a latte a few hours ago, actually, which was pretty good because, ironically enough, I did not sleep, but I don't know, an hour or two last night. I was pretty much up all night and then got up at about 8:30. I think I went to bed at probably 5 or 6 a.m. and got up at 8:30. Was like doing other things, let's say, and which is funny because generally I'm in bed by 9 p.m. I'm up by 6, like pretty much every day for the last years or whatever. So for me, it was like good to break the pattern a little bit and change it up and be like, okay, I need to actually break off from the cycle and the rhythm a little bit just to keep things a bit fresh. And sometimes I'll do that. That's actually why I bought the gummy bears the other day, because I was like, I've been eating really well and really simply for 4 months. I need to just eat some fucking gummy bears and have something sweet, which even still, they're not that bad, but it was like, I just need to throw this off a little bit. So, yeah, so no tea today, and I probably won't have any because I already had coffee earlier. What workout or training did you do today? I just went for a quick walk. It's like 90 plus degrees right now and it's super hot. And plus I didn't really sleep last night, so I'm not gonna train, but yesterday I trained for 3.5, 4 hours, something like that. I think I did about 3.5 hours of Tai Chi, and then I did an hour of sitting, or an hour and like 15 of sitting, something like that. Don't remember specifics, but it's somewhere in that range. That's what I did yesterday, and then I didn't sleep. But I still feel pretty good. I don't feel a bit fatigued and tired. I'll definitely go to bed early tonight, but that's what I did. But I haven't been up that late in so many years, man. It was really strange. Will you take herbs today? I may take some of these new formulas that I'll probably be releasing in the next couple weeks that I've been testing for the last few months. I may take some of that later, who knows, but I've been drinking water and had some of my Vitality Zeolite drops in my water so far, and that's about it. Will I talk about the ingredients? Yeah, when I release it and say exactly what it is, I'll talk about all of the ingredients and all the functions. But basically, for like mood support or being able to calm down or having anti-anxiety type effects, or also the ability to just focus more, it's the most potent formula that I've come across to date. So it's two formulas and they really go hand in hand. You can take just one, but they kind of really go well and synergize together. So that'll be cool to finally get out, because I've been taking it for a few months and people are loving it. Do you still do meditation? Yeah, I mean, I just did an hour and some change of sitting practice yesterday. As I did in another video previously talking about meditation, meditation is a specific thing which basically next to no one ever does, and next to no one actually has done, and most of us will never do in our lifetimes because it is the most difficult thing a human being can do. And within traditions, typically there's a specific definition for what meditation actually is, and there's a bunch of other permutations. Like mindfulness is not meditation. Following your breath is not meditation. Sitting quietly and watching your thoughts is not meditation. Literally what those things are is literally what they are. Meaning sitting and following your breath is literally just sitting and following your breath. Sitting and watching your thoughts is just sitting and watching your thoughts. It's all it is, which is such an obvious thing, kind of, but people sometimes have a hard time understanding that what they're doing is actually just what they're doing. So basically, doing stretching and breathing is just doing stretching and breathing. It's not doing yoga. Whatever people are believing or fantasizing about, literally what they're doing is just exactly what they're doing. Doing handstands and aerial yoga and what's the acro yoga? It's just gymnastics. It's just calisthenics. That's literally all it is. I mean, I was gonna make these joke memes of just putting cheerleaders in their cheerleading outfit doing these things, and then having spiritual people in their spiritual uniforms doing their yoga, and be like, this is the same thing, guys. One person is honest, the other person is not. So that's one thing to really keep in mind. But meditation, balancing self-mastery of thought form, that's literally not meditation within the classical sense. That's just rearranging your thoughts based on your acquired nature and preferences and biases, which is of course useful for self-development and hopefully navigating life in a more efficient and effective way, having a better life, being more functional. But that's literally all that it is, and has nothing to do with meditation in what it actually means in a classical sense, which is a very specific, linear, mapped out thing, which I, again, made another video about that previously, so that's all I'll say about that. What could be going on with a person if they have really warm hands and feet? Probably just good blood circulation. I mean, I don't think particularly anything profound or otherworldly or special. It just is good, because a lot of people have super cold hands and feet because they typically have less than functional blood circulation. So if your hands and your feet are nice and warm and toasty, good, got some good blood circulation, and it's probably healthy. So I would be pleased about that. I remember when I was like vegetarian and vegan, my hands and my feet were always ice cubes, like always cold. Now pretty much warm all the time. And it's a very noticeable sensation. After I eat, I warm up quite a lot, and I can tell sometimes I need to eat because my body temp feels like it goes down, and I feel like I start to cool down. Which I'm kind of reaching that point actually as I'm doing this live stream. So I'll probably wrap this up in the next few minutes so I can get some lunch before it gets too late and before it gets too freaking hot, because I think it's like, yeah, it's like 89, and tomorrow's 90s. It's like 90s for the next few days. So it's quite hot. So better get your questions in soon if you have some more. Because I'll be, I guess, wrapping it up pretty soon. But I appreciate everyone tuning in on basically no notice other than just going live and posting on Facebook. So that is pretty cool. So I think what I'll be doing in the future is posting maybe 2 regular videos a week, and then once a week or once every 2 weeks, basically doing a live Q&A and sort of getting in a regular flow and a rhythm. So like having a schedule, Mondays and Fridays, new videos. Wednesday or every other Wednesday, there's a live stream at like a particular time. So let's say either people could submit questions ahead of time if they can't make it, or they at least know they can schedule to be around and get some live stream going on for that time frame, because typically I'm always doing it a bit random and just sort of whenever, which has been the case. Whatever happened to that Jing vid you were making? I mean, I still have it mapped out in my head. I can give you the gist of it right now, which is basically the idea that Jing is your sexual fluids is completely incorrect and is a complete misunderstanding, mistranslation, and is not correct whatsoever. Jing generates all of the fluids in your body, not just your semen, and it literally is not your semen. It's a much more complicated, and I have one video already on my channel where I talk about the wider context of Jing and how it connects to Ming and kidneys and a larger process of an unfoldment of a life path and a process of development from birth to death. It's a lot more of what Jing actually is, but how it's used is typically like by dudes who don't want to, who have some fear and anxiety around their sexuality typically. So they want to like, I'm going to hold on to my semen because that's going to hold on to my Jing, which oftentimes, coincidentally, these types of guys are often into gaming. They're into gamers, or they're spending a lot of time on computers and a lot of time on technology, which is equally or not greater of a Jing drainage. Like someone's like a hardcore gamer, it's just draining their Jing just as much, if not more so, than if they were to have sex or whatever. So there's many other leakages of Jing than just, I'm not gonna ejaculate. Or some dudes go so crazy to be like, I'm gonna ejaculate, but then I'm gonna eat my semen and that's gonna save the Jing, or like just disgusting, crazy nonsense. Or all of the Montauk Chia bullshit of like, I'm gonna press the $1 million point, or I'm gonna pull the energy up my spine. Total nonsense. Like literally doing that will burn you out more than just having sex normally, because you're not moving your Jing, you're not moving energy, you're literally just stimulating and overheating your nervous system. That's it. What people are feeling and they think is energy is just a strong mental intention having a negative effect on their nervous system. But also on the flip side, denial of that basic biological function creates stagnation as well, which typically will lead to other problems and create other mental imbalances. So the longer term, broader context is actually developing a healthy relationship. Like what I've been saying for a while is like, instead of all these no-fap type of people or celibate type people, or even like men going their own way types, or basically all these permutations on this thing, it's like, well, what about actually just having a healthy relationship with another human being? Like, it's a very different thing if you're rubbing one out to porn 4 times a day by yourself than being in a loving relationship and having a connection and sharing this experience with another person. It's a drastically different experience. But like I talked about this in my Does Lion's Mane Kill Libido video, because I was getting this question from people and I'm just like, this is the most absurd, nonsensical stuff I've ever heard. Well, that I'd heard that week, because I've heard a lot of nonsensical stuff. So I did research, and it just goes back to a couple Reddit threads. And One of them was started by a guy who was beating it 4 times a day to porn, and then being like, oh, I took lion's mane and it seemed to have a decrease in my libido. And I'm like, you're so far in a fucked up situation and you're gonna blame lion's mane? And then like I gotta deal with, it was only like 2 or 3 people being like, oh, I read online and they're like, a lot of people are saying lion's mane kills libido. Translation, like 2 people said it who are probably addicted to masturbation and porn and other things. So I'm sure the causal effect had little to nothing to do with lion's mane. It had more to do with so many other aspects in their diet and lifestyle and poor choices. But they want to blame lion's mane. I'm like, give me a break, guys. Like, what world are we living in where this is even a legitimate line of question and inquiry? But you read that, and I get questions from people like this all the time. Another one was like, oh, I read online, you have to take lion's mane every day for life, otherwise you don't get the benefits. I'm like, some dude said it on Reddit, or it was on some blog, and then now all of a sudden it's information. No, it's trash. Like, so it's sometimes the ability to evaluate information accurately is beneficial. So anyways, coming back to your question, this is all related back to the Jing video, and it's on a larger scale, not just sex, but all the base desires, which the larger scale is to understand that we actually function pretty much on sex and fighting, sex and conflict. People think we're these complicated creatures with all these vast array of emotional experiences and we're spiritual beings and all this complexity and abstraction, when the more clarity one is able to develop and ability to reflect, the more you can start to see that actually what drives the vast majority of people is sex and conflict, or sex and power. Basically what it comes down to. So as it relates to Jing, it's all of the base desires and how we are relating to them is having a great deal of influence over the expression of our Jing, which ends up with all of the basic TCM Chinese type of, or the basic TCM type of recommendations, which is not being too excessive and not going to extremes in understanding context. Meaning, if they're a 20-something-year-old male, the recommendations and the scales are different than a 50 to 60-year-old male, because obviously they're in a different phase of their life, in a different cycle. So things are variable across many different causal chains, let's say. So again, it comes back to, it's a complicated, long-winded concept, which is interrelated with many aspects of the philosophical system. And so someone took one little piece that's not even actually a piece, not even actually true, and not even actually based on anything in there. They took it out and extrapolated it and created this whole world of confusion, i.e. Montauk Chia bullshit, multi-orgasmic male, holding in your Jing, all this nonsense that is just not true and is not based on any of these systems. But this is what people know and they operate on. So they just start off confused, read more confusion, think it's actually the fact because they're like, oh, now I'm learning Taoism. Now I'm learning something ancient, and this is ancient spiritual tradition. It's special and it's better than what I was doing before. And it's all this mental exertion. So then there's not any general critical thought or real thing applied to it, which is also fair because it's sort of the world we live in where the vast majority of what is available is confusion and nonsense. So if that's the norm and that's the baseline, it's no wonder people are confused and living on nonsense, thus need to rely on imagination, faith, superstition, pseudo-science, pseudo-spirituality, all these other surrogates for anything that's actually real or legitimate. But again, that's just my opinion. So that's a bit of a gist of that Jing video and some of the larger brushstrokes. Obviously, when I do the video, it'll be much more coherent and organized and linear and systematic, but that's the general idea in terms of how people completely misunderstand the concept and how it's been completely bastardized and just really badly misunderstood. Why did you mention that you wanted to avoid contact with the earth? For me personally, I avoid contact with the earth because I don't want to drain my chi. So this is only relevant because I'm at a stage in certain practices where I'm actually trying to build and accumulate and generate more yang chi, let's say. So if I touch the earth, it basically will just straight up earth right out, because the earth is this big yin field, this big yin magnet, which is way stronger than my magnetic field. So it just straight up earths out, which is quite funny because there's certain practices where people believe that if they put a copper tube or a copper wire in their butthole or wrap it around their scrotum or attach it to their perineum, that they're going to absorb chi from the earth. In actuality, it's the opposite, which everyone knows. With this whole thing about grounding and earthing, everyone knows it's a drain, and it's a, you know, it's a which is the bigger magnetic field, the earth or you? Obviously the earth. So for me, that's why I avoid it. But that's only for me for this certain context and situation. For everyone else, it doesn't matter, and it's probably useful, and it's probably a beneficial thing because people are picking up and carrying around so many things, because it takes a lot of time and energy and effort to actually get your system to the point where you are actually influencing your environment versus being influenced by your environment. Because it's just as simple as that. You're either being influenced or you're influencing. So basically all it comes down to. So that's for me within this context. But what I recommend for myself and what I actually do and live and think and feel and believe is typically not what I tell people, because they're not me and they're not in this specific context and situation. So it's a bit different. But that's why I said it. That's the specific reasoning. So yeah. Let me know if there's any other questions. I'll probably wrap this up in the next couple of minutes because it's been about an hour, and I need to get some lunch before it gets too late. And I also have to pee quite badly because I chugged like a couple glasses of water just now to rehydrate since I was up quite late. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. I think I will conclude it here as there's no more questions coming in. I appreciate everyone showing up and tuning in with the good questions. Hopefully it's been helpful or beneficial in some way. But again, I'll be back again more regular. The only reason I took a break for a while was that I was focusing on other things in my life. So for myself, I was working on stilling my own Jing and getting prepped for meditation retreat and getting prepped for actually doing more sitting practice. So sometimes I find being in front of the screen and dealing with people gets too much mental energy stimulated in me. Then it takes me a little bit to, it just kind of like bounces around and buzzes around where like this will be over and my brain just keeps going with stuff, and I find that annoying. To be honest, because I'd rather have my brain be quiet. So that's sometimes why I avoid videos, because I'm trying to do other things. Or sometimes I just feel so sunk and grounded and chill that I don't feel like just staring at a screen. So that's why I avoid it and why I did for a while. But I mean, ultimately, I would hope that my skill level will get to the point where it kind of just doesn't matter. So that's, yeah. So when will my next video be? Sometime in the next week. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going to be filming more regularly. And again, I'll be soon getting on a schedule where videos come out every week at the same time. And everything will be like, basically what I'll do is film 10 videos, queue them up for the month, get them scheduled, they'll come out, and then I'll do some live streams intermixed in there just to change it up and have more live interaction and whatnot. Can you do videos brewing oolong and or pu'er? Yeah, definitely. I could do instructional type videos on that. I think I actually already have a video about how to brew oolong tea on my channel. It's probably like 20 minutes, which is way longer than it needs to be because you could easily explain it in 3 minutes, but I would recommend watching that because it just goes over the whole process of rinsing and steeping and whatever. So I'll have to think about it because I brew tea. I don't think about it. I just do it because I understand all the variables, so I don't have to concern myself with it. And I'm able to brew what I feel to be extremely delicious, good pots of tea. So, but that is a good suggestion for video ideas. Also, a few videos down, I did post a video where I said I could use your help, and there's a link to a Google Forms where I was requesting video ideas from viewers. So videos that you want me to do. So if you want me to do a video, it's a good idea to click on that form and plug it in there, and then I'll do that video. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. I hope your Saturday is going well, and enjoy the rest of your evening wherever you are on the planet. I'm gonna have some lunch for now, and thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for the questions, and I will talk to you in the next video.